Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. It was a calm evening on Earth, the sun sinking low into the horizon, casting an orange glow over the city. Ethan, a quiet man in his late 20s, had just finished his shift at the local diner and was walking home through the quiet suburban streets. His mind was occupied with the small troubles of everyday life, yet his heart carried a deep sense of loneliness. In a world bustling with noise, he felt like a mere speck, unnoticed by the people around him. As he passed through the park near his apartment, a sudden rustling in the trees caught his attention. A soft cry for help echoed through the fading light, one that seemed so out of place, so human. But when Ethan rushed toward the sound, he was not prepared for what he would find. Lying on the grass, barely conscious, was an alien woman. She was a breathtaking sight, though it was clear she had suffered terribly. Her skin shimmered with an ethereal glow, pale with a faint bluish tint, as though she had been starved for far too long. Her long hair, which cascaded like silver moonlight, lay tangled in the grass, and her eyes, large, luminous, and full of fear, looked up at him as if he were some kind of savior. Ethan dropped to his knees beside her, his heart pounding. "Hey, are you all right?" he asked gently, despite knowing she couldn't possibly understand him. Her labored breathing and gaunt frame told a tragic story, one that needed no translation. She tried to speak, her voice faint, the words too weak to form coherently. Survival must stay." Her eyes flickered with desperation, a silent plea that Ethan felt deep in his chest. He didn't hesitate. The world around him seemed to disappear as he scooped her up in his arms, her delicate form light despite her frailty. Without thinking about the oddness of the situation, how a human like him could be helping an extraterrestrial being, he rushed toward his apartment. The night sky above felt oppressive, the air heavy with uncertainty. Was this real? Was she a hallucination or something else entirely? But as Ethan looked down at her, feeling the warmth of her body against his, there was no mistaking the fact that she was alive, yet barely so. Upon entering his apartment, Ethan gently laid her on his couch, rushing to his kitchen to find anything that might help. A quick search yielded some water and crackers, and he hurried back to her side. He gently propped her up, offering the water first. She drank with a desperation that almost broke his heart, her hands trembling as she held the glass. Ethan didn't know much about aliens, if she even was one, but he could see she needed far more than just food and water. She needed rest, recovery, care. He placed the crackers on the coffee table, not sure if they would even help, but it was all he had. "Stay here. I'll get more help," he promised, but something in her eyes made him pause. There was something almost pleading in her gaze, as if she feared being left alone. "No, no, leave," she whispered, her voice soft yet firm, eyes filled with a sadness that felt ancient. "Stay, please." Ethan's heart swelled with an overwhelming sense of protectiveness. There was no way he could leave her. With her fragile state and the obvious signs of having been in some kind of survival crisis, Ethan knew she needed him, and he couldn't let her down. "I'm not going anywhere," he assured her, his voice steady despite the flood of uncertainty in his chest. But as he sat down beside her, unsure of what to do next, a part of him realized that this was not just about survival. This encounter, whatever it was, had changed something in him. Her existence, her desperate plea for help, had ignited something in Ethan, a sense of responsibility, a desire to protect something far greater than himself. As the hours ticked by, the alien woman's breathing began to slow. She rested, her face softening, her once frail body gaining a hint of strength from the food and water. But the bond between them, though unspoken, seemed to grow. Ethan watched over her, unsure of what the future held, but certain that his life had just taken a strange, unforeseen turn. The next morning, she awoke. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, and Ethan was there, sitting by her side. The sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on her face. She studied him with a mixture of confusion and gratitude, as if she was not entirely sure where she was or who he was. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice clearer now, though still fragile. "My name is Ethan," he said softly, offering her a small smile. "I found you last night. You were in trouble." She nodded slightly, her gaze distant. "I am Lyra," she whispered, her voice tinged with something old and profound. "I am, from far away." Ethan nodded. He had no idea where she came from, or how she ended up here, but one thing was for certain, her presence in his life was not an accident. And as she looked at him, as if searching for something more than just survival, Ethan realized that he was caught in something much bigger than himself. Something that might change the course of his life forever. He didn't know how to help her completely, but he was willing to try. Whatever she needed, he would provide. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a purpose rise within him, something more than the mundane tasks of his daily life. He had no idea what was coming, but he knew he wasn't about to abandon this beautiful, mysterious alien woman. There was more to this than either of them could possibly understand. And as Lyra gazed at him with a quiet intensity, Ethan knew his life would never be the same. The days that followed blurred into a strange, dreamlike existence for Ethan. His once routine life had been upended by the presence of Lyra, the mysterious alien woman he had found starving in the park. It was difficult for him to grasp the full scale of what was happening, as if reality itself had shifted in the space of a single, fateful night. He had gone to bed an ordinary man, and now he was waking up to something extraordinary. Lyra, for her part, had remained silent for most of the time. She was weak, still recovering from the ravages of whatever journey or calamity had brought her to Earth, and Ethan respected her need for rest. She would often spend hours staring out of his window at the city skyline, her eyes lost in a faraway place, as if her mind wandered across galaxies. Ethan found himself watching her more than he meant to. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her presence that captivated him. There was a gravity to her, something beyond her physical appearance, an aura of quiet strength that seemed to pulse in time with the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Despite the alien nature of her being, there was an undeniable connection between them. He couldn't quite put it into words, but it felt like the beginning of something profound. They communicated as best they could, but Ethan's limited knowledge of languages, let alone alien dialects, made their conversations a slow process. Lyra's voice, when she spoke, was gentle but often tinged with an undercurrent of sorrow, as if every word she uttered was a battle against some unspoken pain. And though she didn't speak often, Ethan noticed the subtle shifts in her behavior, the way her eyes lingered on him for a moment too long, or how her small, quiet smiles seemed to carry a weight of gratitude far beyond what he had expected. One afternoon, as Ethan was cleaning up after lunch, Lyra spoke again, her voice tentative but clear. "Ethan," she said, her gaze fixed on the floor as if she were trying to find the right words. "Thank you for helping me." Ethan turned to face her, drying his hands on a towel. There was something different about the way she said it this time, more than just gratitude. It felt vulnerable. He took a deep breath and smiled. "Of course," he replied, his voice steady. "I'm just glad you're feeling better. You don't need to thank me." Lyra looked up at him then, her luminous eyes meeting his. There was a depth in her gaze that made his heart flutter, a silent plea hidden behind the calm exterior. She opened her mouth to say something, but paused. The air between them felt charged, as if the weight of their unspoken thoughts hung heavy in the room. She swallowed, then whispered, "I am not from here. My people, my planet, we are far away. I never meant to be here." Ethan's breath caught in his throat, the words sinking in. She wasn't from Earth, but he had known that already. The question was, how far away was she from home? And what did it mean for him, for them, that she was here? "I know," he said softly, walking over to sit next to her. "But you're safe now. We'll figure this out." Whatever it takes, we'll figure it out. Lyra's eyes glistened with emotion. Her delicate fingers curled into the fabric of the couch, and for a moment, Ethan thought she might break down. But she held herself together, her calmness returning as quickly as it had wavered. "I don't want to be a burden," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan frowned, his heart aching. "You're not a burden. You're something important." He hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "I don't know how this happened. I don't know what comes next, but I'm not turning my back on you." For the first time since their encounter, Lyra smiled, slowly, almost shyly, but it was a smile full of relief, as if she had been holding her breath until now. She placed a delicate hand on his arm, the touch light but real. "You're kind, Ethan. I have not known kindness in so long. I don't understand why you would do this for me, but I—" She trailed off, her voice faltering as she looked away. Ethan felt his chest tighten. "I couldn't just leave you there. I don't even know why I did it, but it feels like the right thing to do." He gave a small laugh, shaking his head in confusion. "I'm not a hero, Lyra. I'm just me." She studied him, her eyes searching his face. "Perhaps, on your world, kindness is something that only a few understand," she said quietly. "But here, it's everything." Her words left a weight on him, a realization that what she was saying ran deeper than he had initially imagined. Maybe she hadn't just come to Earth because of some random accident. Maybe there was something about him, something about Earth, that called to her. That evening, after Lyra had eaten a bit more and rested, Ethan noticed a faint glow around her, a subtle shimmer that seemed to intensify in the dark. It was not the result of any artificial light in the room but something intrinsic to her. She had told him before that she was from far away, but she hadn't explained what her people were like, or what kind of world she came from. Every time Ethan asked her more about herself, Lyra would get quiet, her gaze drifting to the window, as if she were afraid to remember too much. That night, as he lay in bed, the image of Lyra's face haunted him. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story than she was letting on. What had happened to her people? What had driven her to the brink of starvation and brought her to Earth? Ethan didn't know, but he was certain of one thing: this wasn't just some random event. Lyra's presence in his life had meaning. It was part of something far greater than either of them could understand. The next morning, as he made coffee in the kitchen, he heard Lyra's soft voice behind him. "I need to tell you something," she said, her tone serious, almost fearful. Ethan turned, heart racing. "What is it, Lyra? You can tell me." She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the window. "I cannot stay here forever," she said softly, the words like a dagger to Ethan's chest. "But I need your help." It was the first time she had mentioned leaving, and it cut deeper than Ethan had expected. The thought of her going, of losing the only connection he had to something greater, something otherworldly, made him realize how deeply she had already woven herself into his life. "Don't go," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Lyra turned to face him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I have no choice," she said, her voice breaking. "But I do not wish to leave you either. I do not know what to do." The room felt suffocating, the weight of Lyra's words hanging in the air like a storm on the horizon. Ethan stood frozen, his heart a storm of emotions. The very idea of her leaving, of the brief connection they had formed being severed, was unbearable. He had never expected to care so deeply for someone he barely knew, let alone someone from another world. Yet here they were, two souls caught in a dance neither of them fully understood. "I don't want you to leave," Ethan said, his voice strained. He was surprised by the intensity of his own words. He had never felt this way about anyone before, certainly not about a stranger who had appeared in his life out of nowhere. You're important to me, Lyra. I don't know why, but I can't just let you go." Lyra's eyes shimmered, her gaze soft and filled with something he couldn't place. It was a mixture of sorrow and gratitude, as if she had been expecting him to say those words, yet hadn't wanted to hear them. I am not from this world, Ethan. My people, my race, they cannot survive here. Our physiology is not meant for Earth, she said, her voice breaking as she spoke. I was sent here as an envoy, to study this planet, to find a way for us to survive here if we were ever forced to relocate. But I failed. I failed to gather the resources, failed to communicate with my people. And now I'm stranded. Ethan's mind reeled at the revelation. An envoy? From another world? The implications were staggering. He had always believed that humanity was alone in the universe, but now, standing before him, was proof of something far more expansive, far more complex. I don't understand, Ethan said, his voice trembling. How are you supposed to help your people if you're stuck here? What does this mean for you? Lyra looked down, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. It means that I have no way to get back. No way to contact them. My species, we are not like humans. We are not many. We do not have large fleets or great technologies. If I am stranded here, there is no one coming for me. I am alone. Ethan felt his chest tighten, a deep ache spreading through him at the sorrow in her voice. He couldn't begin to comprehend what it must feel like to be in her position. Stranded on an alien world, cut off from everything she knew, and yet still holding on to hope in the face of such isolation. You're not alone, Ethan said quietly, stepping closer to her. His words were simple, but they felt like a promise. I'm here. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes wide and vulnerable. She opened her mouth, as if to say something, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she leaned forward and placed her hand on his, a gesture of trust and a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had begun to form. For a long moment, they simply sat there, hand in hand, both of them processing the weight of her confession. The universe was vast, full of mysteries that neither of them could understand, but there was one undeniable truth: in that moment, they were not alone. Lyra, Ethan said softly, breaking the silence, I don't know what the future holds. I don't know how we can fix whatever's happened with your people, but I can't just let you go. We'll find a way. Together. Lyra's lips trembled as if she were about to speak, but she hesitated, her gaze flicking to the window once more. You don't understand, Ethan, she whispered, her voice distant. You don't know what I'm capable of. What my people are capable of. If I stay here, if I remain on Earth for too long, things could change. Not just for me, but for everyone. Ethan's brow furrowed, confusion sweeping over him. What do you mean? What could happen? Lyra stood up, walking slowly to the window, her back to him. She stared out into the night, her figure silhouetted against the faint glow of the city lights. My species, we have abilities that are far beyond what humans can comprehend. We can manipulate energy, communicate telepathically, and adapt to nearly any environment. But the longer we stay on a planet like Earth, the more we evolve. It's not just our bodies that change, it's our minds. And if I stay here for too long, I could lose myself. I could become something else. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He had always believed that humanity was the pinnacle of life, the most advanced species in the universe. But Lyra's words made him realize just how little he knew about the vastness of existence. Something else, he repeated, his voice shaky. What do you mean? Lyra's voice was barely above a whisper. We are not human, Ethan. We are not bound by the same rules of nature that you are. If I stay here, I will become a threat. To you. To everyone. The room fell silent as Ethan tried to process what she had just said. The idea that Lyra, the beautiful and kind alien woman he had come to care for, could become a danger to him was unfathomable. He couldn't imagine her as anything other than the gentle soul who had sought refuge in his home. Is there any way to stop it? He asked, his voice tight with worry. Lyra turned back to face him, her expression conflicted. I don't know. I've never stayed on a planet for so long. I was meant to return home before any of this could happen, but now I have no way to communicate with them. No way to return. Ethan took a step forward, his mind racing. He couldn't let this happen to her. He couldn't let her become something else, something dangerous, not when she had trusted him, not when she had shared her most vulnerable truth. Then we'll find a way, he said, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding in his chest. There has to be something we can do. We can't just give up. Lyra's eyes softened, and for the first time in days, she seemed to relax. You would help me? Even knowing what could happen. Ethan didn't hesitate. Of course I would. You're not just some project, Lyra. You're someone who matters to me. Lyra looked at him, her gaze filled with something she hadn't shown before, hope. It was faint, but it was there, flickering in her eyes. I don't deserve this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to deserve it. You're here now, and that's what matters. For the first time since their encounter, Lyra allowed herself to smile, a soft, fragile expression that spoke volumes. In that smile, Ethan saw a flicker of hope that mirrored his own. The future was uncertain, but they would face it together. And in that moment, Ethan realized that his life had been changed forever, not just by the alien woman he had saved, but by the unspoken connection they shared. A connection that could not be broken, no matter the odds. The weight of Lyra's words lingered long after she had spoken them. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the implications of what she had said, that by staying on Earth, she could lose herself, could become something dangerous. Something that could hurt him. The thought gnawed at him, churning in his stomach, but he refused to let it rule his mind. He had to find a way to help her, to keep her safe. But what if he couldn't? The days that followed were tense and uncertain. Ethan spent hours researching everything he could find about extraterrestrial life, studying theories, ancient myths, and even space exploration articles. There were no answers, just more questions. But one thing became clear to him, there was no easy fix. He couldn't just make a call to a government agency and expect them to help. The knowledge of Lyra's existence, of her kind, was too important to be exposed to the world just yet. The consequences could be catastrophic. As Lyra continued her recovery, she became more withdrawn. She would often sit for long periods by the window, staring out at the city, as if waiting for something. It was like she was expecting something to come, something inevitable. And despite all the promises they had made to each other, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something dark was closing in on them both. One evening, after Lyra had gone to bed, Ethan sat on the couch, staring at the quiet hum of the television. His mind wandered, restless, unable to focus. He kept thinking about the way she had looked at him earlier that day, her eyes full of gratitude, yes, but also fear. She was scared of what might happen to her, and that fear was starting to bleed into Ethan's own thoughts. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, loud and sharp, making Ethan jump. He froze for a moment, unsure if he had heard it right. His heart pounded in his chest as he stood up slowly, moving toward the door. He glanced over at Lyra's room, but she had already fallen silent, there was no sound from inside. Ethan hesitated before opening the door. When he did, there was no one there. Just the dark street outside, empty and quiet. But as he stepped out onto the porch, he felt something. A strange, static charge in the air, like a storm waiting to break. He glanced around nervously, but saw no sign of anyone. Then, he heard it, a faint, high-pitched hum, barely audible but growing louder. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the hum turned into a low, vibrating sound, like an engine powering up. He stepped back into the house, slamming the door shut behind him. His eyes immediately went to Lyra's room, his mind racing. What was happening? The hum grew louder, and then, abruptly, it stopped. Silence. Ethan stood motionless, every nerve in his body on edge. He had no idea what was going on, but something felt wrong. His instincts screamed at him to protect Lyra, to keep her safe at all costs. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was well past midnight, and he had the eerie sense that something had changed. Suddenly, Lyra's voice broke the stillness. "Ethan, there is no time." Ethan turned to find her standing in the doorway to her room, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes were wide with fear, but there was also a glimmer of something else, resolve. "What's happening?" Ethan asked, rushing toward her. "I felt it," she said, her voice shaky but firm. "They are here. They've found me." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. "Who? Who's found you?" Lyra stepped back into her room, her movements quick and urgent. "My people, they are not what I thought they were. I was wrong to trust them." Ethan followed her inside, his heart hammering. He had no idea what she was talking about. "Lyra, please. What's going on? Who is coming?" She turned to face him, her expression full of regret. "My race, my people, they are not as benevolent as I led you to believe. We are a dying species, and we are desperate. We've resorted to using other planets, other species to survive. They will take what they need from Earth, and they won't hesitate to destroy everything in their path if it means survival." Ethan's mind spun, trying to process her words. You're telling me your people are going to invade? That they're coming here?" Lyra nodded, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Yes. But not just them. There are others, factions, different groups that will come for me. They will stop at nothing to claim Earth for themselves. And I cannot allow them to harm you, Ethan." Ethan took a step back, his mind reeling. The peaceful woman he had rescued, the kind, vulnerable creature who had begged him to stay by her side, was now revealing that she was part of something far darker than he could ever have imagined. But even in the face of such terror, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Lyra's story than she was telling him. "You don't have to face this alone," Ethan said, his voice unwavering. "We'll fight. We'll find a way to stop them." Lyra shook her head. "No, Ethan. You don't understand. My people, they won't care. They will come for me regardless. You cannot fight them. You must leave, for your own safety." "I'm not leaving you," Ethan said firmly, taking her hand in his. "Whatever happens, we'll figure this out together." Lyra's eyes filled with tears as she stared at him, torn between the love and fear that had filled her heart since she first arrived on Earth. She opened her mouth to speak but stopped, her eyes widening in terror. Ethan turned sharply, his senses on high alert. From the corner of the room, a faint blue glow appeared, growing brighter by the second. Lyra's breath quickened, and she staggered back as if the glow itself was pulling her in. "What is it?" Ethan asked, fear creeping into his voice. Lyra whispered, "They are here." Before Ethan could react, a surge of energy filled the room, and the walls seemed to vibrate with power. The air grew thick, charged with an unnatural energy. Lyra's face contorted in pain as she sank to her knees, her body racked with an invisible force. Ethan rushed to her, trying to steady her, but the force was too strong. He could barely touch her without being pushed back by the intense energy. "I'm sorry, Ethan," Lyra gasped, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted you to get involved. But now, it's too late." The door to the apartment slammed open, and Ethan whipped around, his heart in his throat. Figures emerged from the shadows, their shapes cloaked in darkness, and Ethan realized with a jolt that they were not human. Lyra's people had arrived. The figures in the doorway loomed in the dim light, their forms shifting like shadows given shape. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, and every instinct screamed at him to protect Lyra, to fight back. But the sight of these alien beings was unlike anything he had ever imagined. They weren't just otherworldly, they exuded an aura of power and danger, their movements unnaturally fluid, as if they were more force than flesh. Lyra gasped, her body trembling as the figures advanced into the room. She looked up at them, her expression a mix of fear, regret, and something deeper, resignation. "Lyra," one of the figures spoke, its voice like a smooth, melodic hum. "You've made a mistake by staying here. You've disobeyed the council." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. The being's voice wasn't human, yet it carried with it an unsettling authority that made his skin crawl. It was clear that Lyra's arrival on Earth wasn't an accident, it was part of a greater, more complex plan. And now that plan had come to fruition. "Please," Lyra whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't know. I didn't realize what I was doing. I only wanted to survive, to help." The figure stepped forward, its eyes, dark and glowing with an otherworldly light, fixed on Lyra. "You were meant to return, to gather the necessary resources. Instead, you've made yourself an outcast. You've become a liability." Ethan moved closer to Lyra, his protective instincts taking over. His eyes flicked between the alien beings, trying to assess their strength. There were 3 of them, tall and imposing, their forms cloaked in flowing, metallic garments. Their presence was like a suffocating fog that seemed to drain the air from the room. "I won't let you take her," Ethan said, his voice unsteady but resolute. "She's not a liability. She's not what you think." The figure who had spoken tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing as it assessed Ethan with cold indifference. "You are human," it said, its tone laced with disdain. "You cannot comprehend what is at stake here. You do not understand the consequences of harboring her." Ethan's fists clenched. He was outmatched. He knew it, and he knew Lyra knew it too. But he wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when she had risked everything to stay on Earth, to share her vulnerability with him. "You're wrong," Ethan said, taking another step forward. "You don't get to decide what happens to her. She's not your property. She's not some experiment for you to control." The alien's expression flickered, a brief moment of something akin to amusement passing over its face. Human emotions. Such an interesting, and ultimately useless, thing. "Do you believe you can stop us?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He glanced at Lyra, who was still kneeling on the floor, her face pale with the effort of holding herself together. Her eyes were locked on the alien beings, a mixture of fear and regret clouding her expression. "You should leave," Lyra said softly, her voice full of sorrow. "I'm the one they want. Not him." Ethan shook his head, his voice firm. "I'm not going anywhere. If they want you, they'll have to go through me." The alien leader's eyes shifted, its expression unreadable. "So be it." It raised one hand, and with a single gesture, the air seemed to crackle, a powerful energy wave sweeping across the room. Ethan barely had time to react before the force hit him, sending him crashing to the floor. The pain was immediate and intense, like being struck by an invisible force. Ethan gasped for breath, feeling a surge of heat and pressure in his chest. His body was seizing, unable to move as the energy continued to press down on him, suffocating him. His vision blurred, and he could hear Lyra's voice calling his name, but it sounded distant, muffled by the pounding in his head. "Ethan!" Lyra screamed, her voice breaking through the haze. Through sheer willpower, Ethan managed to lift his hand, trying to push himself up, but the force pressing down on him was too much. The alien figures loomed over him, their cold eyes gleaming with power. "Let him go!" Lyra cried, her voice filled with desperation. The alien leader looked down at Ethan, then turned its gaze to Lyra. It seemed to deliberate for a moment, and then the pressure on Ethan's chest suddenly eased. He gasped for air, the pain subsiding just enough for him to push himself up, his hands shaking from the exertion. I told you, the leader said, its voice a low, almost bored hum. You cannot stop us. You have no power here. Ethan stumbled to his feet, still dizzy from the intense pressure. He looked at Lyra, her face a mixture of guilt and regret, but also something else, a determination. She was stronger than he had ever realized, and in that moment, he knew that if anyone could find a way to stop these beings, it was her. You don't have to do this, Lyra said, her voice trembling. She stood up slowly, her body still weak from the ordeal, but there was something in her eyes now, something defiant. I will not go with you. I will not let you take me back to that life. I have made my choice. The alien leader narrowed its eyes. You do not understand, Lyra. You are not in control of your own fate. The council will have you. And if you continue to resist, you will bring destruction to this planet. We will not allow that. Lyra's eyes flashed with anger. You don't get to threaten me, or anyone else. I will stop you. Ethan watched in awe as the energy around Lyra seemed to shimmer, her form glowing faintly, almost like a reflection of the power she had once spoken about. Her fear was gone, replaced by something else, something ancient, something that spoke of the untapped potential within her. The aliens seemed to sense it too. They hesitated, and for a brief moment, the room was filled with a tense, quiet silence. The balance between them had shifted. You are more than what you appear to be, Lyra, the leader said, its voice tinged with a rare hint of uncertainty. But you still cannot win. I don't need to win, Lyra said, her voice calm but full of resolve. I only need to stop you from taking what isn't yours. Before the leader could respond, Lyra raised her hands, and with a flash of light, the air around them seemed to pulse. The room vibrated with energy, and Ethan felt the intense pressure again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the alien's power, this time, it was Lyra's. The aliens recoiled, visibly shocked by the force emanating from her. Ethan stood, his heart racing, watching as Lyra's energy intensified, her body glowing with a fierce, unstoppable light. I've made my choice, she said, her voice unwavering. And I will protect this world, and you, at all costs. The leader's expression shifted, and for the first time, Ethan saw something like fear in its eyes. You have no idea what you are doing, it whispered. But it was too late. The tension in the room was palpable, the air charged with an electric hum as Lyra's energy crackled around her. Ethan could hardly believe what he was seeing. The woman he had rescued from starvation, the vulnerable, fragile creature who had been so kind to him, was now radiating power unlike anything he had ever witnessed. It was as if a dormant part of her had awakened, a force beyond human comprehension that pulsed with raw intensity. The three alien beings stood frozen for a moment, their glowing eyes wide with disbelief. They hadn't anticipated this. They hadn't anticipated Lyra's strength. You are, more than you appear, the alien leader murmured, its voice filled with awe and a hint of fear. You've tapped into something ancient. But it's too late. You cannot stop us. We are the heirs of the stars, and Earth is ours to claim. Lyra's expression was unwavering, her eyes sharp and focused. This world is not yours to conquer. You've underestimated what humanity is capable of, and you've underestimated me. Without warning, she thrust her hands forward, sending a pulse of pure energy toward the alien leader. The force of it was enough to shatter the air, the room vibrating with power. The alien leader raised its arms to shield itself, but the blast pushed it back, its feet skidding across the floor. The other two aliens flinched, taking a step back in response to the overwhelming surge of energy. Ethan watched in awe, his heart pounding in his chest. Lyra was fighting back, not just to save herself, but to protect everything she had come to care for. He had never seen anything like it before. For a moment, everything seemed suspended in time, the alien leader struggling to regain its footing, Lyra standing tall, glowing with a light that felt like the very essence of the planet itself. But then, as the energy in the room continued to pulse, the aliens regained their composure, their expressions hardening. "You are foolish, Lyra," the leader spat, its voice no longer calm but filled with anger. "You forced our hand. We will not let you disrupt the balance." With a sudden, swift motion, the alien leader raised its hand, and a beam of dark energy shot forward, aimed directly at Lyra. Ethan's blood ran cold as the beam cut through the air, its power so intense that it seemed to distort the space around it. "Lyra!" Ethan shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the blast. In that moment, Lyra moved with a speed that seemed impossible, twisting out of the way just in time. The beam grazed her arm, sending a shockwave of pain through her, but she didn't falter. She recoiled for a split second, gritting her teeth against the burn, but then, with renewed fury, she launched herself toward the leader, her hands glowing brighter than ever. "You will not control me," she snarled, her voice a low growl. The energy she unleashed this time was focused, precise, and devastating. The air around her crackled with an almost tangible force as the blast collided with the leader, sending it crashing into the far wall with a deafening impact. The leader let out a strangled cry, the sound like metal scraping against stone, before it crumpled to the ground, temporarily incapacitated. The other two aliens, now visibly shaken, hesitated for a moment. They looked to each other, clearly calculating their next move. It was clear they hadn't anticipated Lyra's full potential, and now they were facing the consequences of underestimating her. "We were wrong," one of them hissed, its voice cold. "She's a threat. She's too powerful." Ethan didn't know what to do. He couldn't fight alongside Lyra, he wasn't capable of wielding the kind of power she had, but he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. He had to help, even if it was only by keeping her safe. "I won't let them take you," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "We'll fight them together." Lyra glanced over at him, her eyes filled with gratitude but also with an urgent plea. "Stay back, Ethan. They won't stop. If you're caught in this, you'll be a liability." But Ethan didn't listen. He couldn't just sit idly by while the woman he cared about fought for her life. He had already come too far to back down now. "I'm not leaving you," he said again, his tone firm. He could see that Lyra was torn. She didn't want to put him in danger, but she also knew she couldn't do this alone. With a final, reluctant nod, she turned her attention back to the two remaining aliens. The aliens, now more cautious, raised their hands, summoning dark energy of their own. The air around them warped, shimmering with unnatural power. They weren't going to let this go. "We are the heirs of the stars," one of them said coldly, its voice rising in a crescendo. "We are beyond your understanding, beyond your reach. And we will not leave this planet until we have what we came for." Lyra's expression hardened, her body glowing with renewed strength. "Then you'll have to kill me first," she said, her voice fierce. The alien leader, still dazed from the earlier blast, staggered to its feet, its eyes burning with rage. "You will regret this, Lyra. You will see the power of the stars and understand the cost of defying us." Ethan felt a surge of fear, but also something else, resolve. He wasn't going to let these aliens take her. He wasn't going to let them destroy Earth, or the woman who had come to mean so much to him. Before the aliens could react, Lyra unleashed a wave of energy so strong that the room shook violently. The force of it sent the two remaining aliens stumbling backward, their dark energy flickering and destabilizing. Ethan felt the heat from Lyra's power radiating through the room, and for the first time, he truly understood the magnitude of what she was capable of. She wasn't just a visitor from another world, she was something ancient, a force that had survived across the stars, and now she was fighting for the survival of Earth. But the aliens weren't finished yet. They regrouped, their movements synchronized as they summoned their final, most powerful attack. The air became thick with dark energy, a storm of raw, uncontained power. "Enough," the leader hissed, its voice strained but commanding. "This planet will fall, and you will submit to us." The blast they unleashed was so intense that the entire room seemed to collapse in on itself, the walls buckling under the pressure. Ethan barely had time to react before the explosion of energy washed over them both. He could feel his body being pulled, weightless, as the world around him blurred and twisted. But then, just as quickly, there was a flash of blinding light, Lyra's light. The blast from the alien's attack dissipated as Lyra pushed forward, using every ounce of her power to deflect the energy. The room crackled with raw force, the walls trembling as Lyra stood her ground, her hands raised toward the oncoming storm of energy. "I told you," she whispered, her voice filled with determination. "You will not take this world. Not while I stand here." The aliens faltered, their energy sputtering as they realized they couldn't overpower her. The balance had shifted once again. The battle for Earth was far from over, but in that moment, Lyra had proven that she wasn't just a victim. She was a force to be reckoned with. And together, they would fight for their survival. The air crackled with a tension so thick it was almost tangible, as if the entire planet was holding its breath. Ethan stood alongside Lyra, his heart racing in his chest, his hands trembling from the sheer power that surrounded them. The alien beings, now backed into a corner, seemed to realize the extent of their miscalculation. They had underestimated her. They had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back. The leader, still shaking from the last blast, lifted its head with renewed resolve. "This ends now," it growled, its voice now a low, rumbling echo, filled with unbridled fury. "You cannot defy the will of the stars. We are the inheritors of the galaxy, and we will not be stopped by the likes of you." Lyra's expression remained calm, her glowing hands still raised, energy swirling around her like a shield. She had become something far greater than the fragile, starved woman Ethan had first found in the forest. In the span of days, she had transformed into a being of immense power, a force capable of standing against them. "You may think you're invincible," she said, her voice unwavering. "But you don't understand Earth, or its people. You don't understand me." The alien leader's eyes narrowed. "You have no idea what you're facing. We have conquered countless worlds. You are nothing to us." "I'm not afraid of you," Lyra replied, the intensity in her voice a sharp contrast to the alien's arrogance. "And you should be afraid of me." The other two aliens, having recovered from their earlier setbacks, stepped forward. They were no longer hesitant, the leader's command had ignited their fury. Together, they raised their hands, gathering dark energy into swirling spheres of black light. The energy in the room was suffocating, and Ethan could feel the oppressive weight of it pressing against his chest, trying to suffocate him. Without warning, the aliens launched their combined attack, a torrent of dark power aimed directly at Lyra. Ethan's heart stopped. He knew it was too much for her to deflect alone, even with all her strength. But Lyra didn't flinch. Instead, she raised her hands higher, and the energy around her flared brighter, brighter than he had ever seen before. It was as if she were drawing from the very core of the earth itself, pulling power from the planet's deepest veins. Her glow intensified, and with a shout that reverberated through the entire room, she released a shockwave of energy so immense that it ripped through the air with a force that could only be described as apocalyptic. The two alien attackers were hit first, their dark energy scattering like dust in the wind. The force of the blast sent them crashing to the ground, their bodies convulsing under the immense strain. The leader, still standing, tried to raise a barrier, but it was too slow. Lyra's energy tore through it effortlessly, and with a final scream of frustration, the alien leader was thrown back against the far wall, its body crumpling to the ground in defeat. Ethan stood in stunned silence, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The room was still, save for the low hum of Lyra's glowing form. For a brief moment, everything seemed frozen in time. Then, the silence was shattered by a low, painful groan from the alien leader. "You think you've won?" the leader spat, its voice raspy and weak. "You don't understand. You don't know the true power of the stars. You cannot protect this world. Lyra's eyes locked onto the leader, her expression cold and resolute. The stars do not control me, she said, her voice like ice. And they will not control Earth either. The alien leader's body trembled, its fingers twitching as it tried to push itself up. But Lyra's energy remained unwavering. She had won, not just in power, but in conviction. The leader's defiance was fading, and now, it was clear that its hold over the situation was slipping. Ethan stepped forward cautiously, his eyes wide as he took in the sight of the alien leader, broken and battered. He had always thought of aliens as unstoppable invaders, but in this moment, he realized that they were just like any other creature, vulnerable to the will of those who stood strong. Lyra, we've won, he said, his voice full of awe. They're done. They're finished. Lyra's gaze softened as she turned to face him, the glow around her beginning to fade. She took a deep breath, and for the first time since the battle had started, her shoulders relaxed. The tension in the room began to dissipate. We've won, she whispered, her voice full of quiet relief. But we still have work to do. Ethan looked at her, confused. What do you mean? Lyra walked over to the alien leader, still lying motionless on the ground. She knelt beside it, her expression unreadable. She placed a hand on the leader's chest, and for a moment, the two locked eyes. The leader's gaze was full of venom, but there was something else there too, something Lyra recognized. It was fear. Fear of the unknown. The council will come, Lyra said softly, her voice barely audible. And when they do, they will seek retribution. We have to ensure they know this world is not theirs to claim. I will need your help to prepare. Ethan's heart sank. The fight wasn't over. The aliens were only a part of a much larger, far more dangerous force that would eventually come for Earth. And Lyra would be at the center of it, standing alone against a tide of intergalactic power. What do we do? Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at him. How do we stop them? Lyra stood up, her eyes distant as she gazed at the shattered remnants of the alien leader. We fight, Ethan. We protect what we love. We make them understand that Earth is not a world to be conquered. That humanity will not bend to their will. For a moment, Ethan wasn't sure how to respond. He was just one man. He didn't have Lyra's power, her strength. But looking at her, standing tall and unshaken, he realized something: he didn't need to be like her. They didn't need to fight alone. They had each other. And together, they could protect this world. I'll fight with you, Ethan said, his voice unwavering. I won't let them take you, and I won't let them take Earth. Lyra's lips curved into a small, bittersweet smile. Thank you, Ethan. You don't know what that means to me. The two of them stood together, their backs to the wreckage of the battle they had just fought. It wasn't the end. Not yet. But it was a beginning of something much greater, something that would change the fate of Earth forever. In the distance, the stars flickered overhead, silent witnesses to the battle that had just transpired. And Lyra knew, with a certainty that burned in her chest, that whatever the Council had planned for Earth, it wouldn't be enough. They had underestimated humanity. They had underestimated her. And now, they would pay the price. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.